My name is Isabel Foxen-Duke, and I'm the host of the Bitcoin Rails podcast, which is a Bitcoin technology podcast on Twitter, X. And I'm incredibly excited about this panel. I've interviewed a lot of kind of gigabrains in the past year, but no full-time Bitcoin core developers. So this is incredibly exciting. And yeah, I think there's kind of quite a bit of mystique around what you guys do. And I'm excited to sort of maybe illuminate a little bit of that, kind of explore what the role of a Bitcoin core developer is in your eyes. And yeah, obviously talk a little bit about what you guys are building, what you guys are doing, what you're excited about, and maybe dig into some of the interesting things that happened this week that we're all curious about. So, to start, I'd love for you all to just sort of introduce yourselves for those who don't know you or your work, and maybe share what you're most proud of having contributed to the protocol thus far in your careers, and a little bit about what you're working on right now.
Hi, I'm Peter Welle. I've been working on Bitcoin for a while. I'm at Chaincode Labs. My current project is Cluster Mempool. I did a talk about it yesterday. Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit more about your history, Peter Welle, just in case people don't know.
History.
What are you most proud of having contributed to the protocol? Or to core? Pick your favorite.
Keep it to 4.
Ultra Prune, I guess.
Ultra Prune.
Yep. Explicit UTXO set model that landed in Bitcoin Core 0.10, I think. 8? 8, yes, Heather's first sync was in 0.10. I guess that would be a close second.
Awesome. Go ahead, Gloria.
Yeah, I'm Gloria. I work on Bitcoin Core at Chaincode Labs. I'm most proud to review Cluster Mempool. I focus mostly on Mempool and transaction relay. I've been working on package relay for a really long time. I think we're at like the 55 PRs or something, very large. And we managed to ship 1P1C, opportunistic package relay in the last year, along with truck and a few other policy changes that make it easier for pre-signed transactions to be fee bumped.
My name is Antoine Poinceau. I work at Chaincode Labs, full-time on Bitcoin Core. My background is that for a while, I would contribute to Bitcoin Core on my spare time. I co-founded 2 companies, one named Leonard in France and one named Without Sardine, who I ran for a while, worked on related project to what I would eventually contribute to Bitcoin Core, namely Manuscript. Then another thing that I'm proud of having contributed to Core would be the security disclosure policy. And recently my main focus has been on the consensus cleanup.
Hi, I'm Greg Sanders. I work for Spiral. I've done various things, but the last couple of years have been Mempool stuff as well. I'd say my most proud projects, 1 or 2, would be I worked on LN Symmetry and then got nerd sniped by Mempool stuff, which culminated in Bitcoin Core 28 and 29, delivering all the pre-cluster Mempool improvements. So I'm excited about everything coming up after too.
Awesome, thank you. So this sort of leads into the next question that I have been told by several people that I polled in the audience is the most important question that they have for you, which is, how do you guys make decisions about what to work on?
I think it would be great for you to explain why working on LN Symmetry and maybe some of the soft work stuff actually led you in the Mempool direction.
Sure. So no one actually had tried going beyond very basic proof of concepts for L2. So I forget what Z-Man calls it, ELTOO, L2. And so I talked to Rusty and I said, hey, could I just work on this? And I rejoined Blockstream for the second time and worked on that. But while I was working on it, I said, hey, the mempool kind of sucks. you can't actually do the things you want to do as a wallet developer, as an app developer. And from there, I saw Gloria had an excellent talk talking about pinning attacks in Lightning today, and that drew me into the whole sphere. And so from there, it's just like researching the problem, developing the problem space, getting it systematized, and then trying to make solutions that are tractable. So just like what I got upset about the most at the time, I guess.
I think presumably, like, you work on L2 stuff because you're interested in scalability or privacy. I personally found Transaction Relay to be really interesting from a censorship resistance point of view. I think a lot of us, not to speak on behalf of anyone else, but like are quite ideologically driven. Like that's why we work on Bitcoin in the first place. And then you kind of see where the pain points are and where things fall down. And I found that pinning attacks, for example, was a weak spot that I felt like existed. And so throwing myself at that problem seemed to be the right thing to do. That's my answer.
Let's go down the line.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. I just get bitten by interesting technical problems, especially if they're like somewhere on the boundary between researchy and at the same time have a chance of having impact on a system that affects many people. Like, it's nice to be able to pick, have the choice to pick various problems that exist all over the place, but they're actually interesting to work on too.
Have you ever had the experience, or when you say interesting to work on, is it just true, just personal interest, or do you ever get to a point with a specific research project where you're like, this may not be really a problem worth all of this energy? Like,
Yes.
Okay. Frequently? I mean, would you say that research is like a good portion of what you're putting your effort into then? And then sort of the things that actually cross the finish line are those that have particular weight in your mind or that the community is rallying behind?
Yeah, there's some of that. I mean, there's certainly projects you pick up and then like, okay, this isn't actually worth spending all that much time on. It isn't really going anywhere. Like you keep working on the things that have a chance of making it past the finish line. So, but sometimes there's also okay, here is a problem. Let's solve it in an overkill way, in such a way that hopefully nobody ever needs to touch this again, and then maybe you spend a bit too much time on it.
Oh, sorry, it's your turn, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Antoine's turn.
On the latest question, I think it's worth pointing out that there is a lot of things that we do not publish. What you see on GitHub is the result of things that were already filtered out from what we found was interesting, but there's a lot of work that we just do, maybe like exchange some branches together, have discussions. I oftentimes discuss random ideas with Greg, for instance, and by DMs. And not everything is going to end up as an actual project, but some of them do. So
I kind of just wanted to add to what Peter was saying. Like, we don't decide what to do based on like what our employers tell us to do, or some kind of central Bitcoin Core roadmap. Those things don't exist in Bitcoin Core, and it's very free form, and everybody gets to work on whatever they're interested in, and that's kind of by design and something that we want. We don't want central control, but that means that all of us, and surprisingly Peter included, experience the frustration of like not having other people care about our work, or our work not going somewhere because we weren't able to convince other people to prioritize it over the other 300 PRs that are open to the repo. And I think all of us, every single one of us, goes through just days where we're really, really frustrated by this. And it means that going out and convincing other developers and the public that the problems we're working on are meaningful and valuable is a part of our job.
I'm curious, like, so you mentioned, like, we're not necessarily influenced by our employers or anything like that, but how influenced are you by just sort of public discourse? And, like, are you kind of thinking deeply about, like, okay, I have my personal interest in this or my personal priorities in this, but maybe this is what I'm hearing the most, the community is clearly calling out for a resolution to XYZ problem. Maybe that's what I should be focusing on. Like, where does that work for you guys, that line?
The loudest opinion is not always the most correct one.
So, I mean, I think it really depends on what you mean by user or public, because there's many stakeholders. So, like, the kind of stuff that I work on often isn't hot button. Like, it's not a parameter that you choose or whatever, a switch. It's like package relay, right? And people don't know. Like, if you asked what a random person wanted on the Bitcoin network, they'd say, you know, a faster horse or you know, like that kind of thing, right? Yeah,
Number
exactly,
go up.
right? Number go up, right? And I can't do that. But what I can do is do research into what people are trying to build and then take that feedback and connect with those people, like identify who you're working for, so to speak, or in interfacing with them and trying to learn what you can and integrating that into kind of the solution set you're looking at.
Historically, I think SegWit is a good example where what I worked on was very much influenced by the public discourse at the time. I think since then that's been much less the case. I feel like I've been just picking interesting research projects more independently.
I'm curious also, kind of moving a little bit more deeply into sort of how you interact with other contributors' work. What's the review process like for getting things merged into Bitcoin Core? Like, could you share that process a little bit as far as you understand it?
Every morning I pray to the review gods and sacrifice a goat, hoping that review will fall from the sky onto my PRs. It's hard. There's a lot of begging. There's a lot of hoping.
Even amongst, like, you know, folks who are arguably probably affiliated all the time and close colleagues, it's still challenging.
Yes. Including, you know, like we review a lot of the same areas of code, but I still, you know, I can't force Greg to review my PR. Yeah, it's a lot of trying to convince people, and, you know, even just coordination is difficult across time zones and organizations, and people have different priorities.
And expertise as well. Bitcoin Core is a massive code base, and most people have an area of expertise. Really, I couldn't go and review every single PR that is currently opened. Some people can, but there is only a few.
I don't think so.
I mean, it really depends on what it is, too. The scope of it, what it's touching, how big it is, how motivated it is. And some people get tripped up setting out a clear goal, an end goal for what they want to do with this like specific change. So setting like a clear, like, this is the end of this project, and just making bite-sized steps tends to be kind of one of the biggest strategies that actually gets success.
Maybe we've not really been answering the entirety of your question, because you were asking about a process. I think, well, largely is you have people writing code, largely self-directed, and you have people reviewing those codes. So, some are regular reviewers, others are more occasional or passerbys, but I think sort of the gold standard is 3 acts from reputable reviewers. Of course, that will depend on what kind of change it is. If it's a typo being fixed in a documentation, it'll either be merged immediately or closed immediately, versus if it's, you know, an overhaul of an entire subsystem somewhere, maintainers will expect much more buy-in from more than that. But
Right.
And compared to, I think, most open source projects and corporate code, this is a very high number.
How many reputable reviewers are there in total?
Depends for what area.
Yeah, like I don't think I've ever seen this in other software projects where reviewers will like have the commit hash that they reviewed and ack that. Some people sign their acks with a signature, and all of these acks are included in the merge message for any PR, which this also needs to be signed by one of several keys. And like I don't think I've ever seen any even open source project have such a like high bar for review.
What's the impact of a knack from a reputable reviewer?
High.
It depends on the motivation, right? I think as our guidelines actually state, like a knack without justification may be ignored. And we try to come to agreement in understanding, and if a knack is because like, I don't know, this code is silly, whatever. Okay, a reputable reviewer isn't going to leave such a comment. But I think just straight out knacks are rare. Like generally from people who regularly contribute to the process, you want to avoid that. You want to, okay, maybe you completely disagree with an approach, but generally you'll try to suggest alternatives or work with a person or whatever too.
Which can be an issue as well, because we might be reluctant to go and knack a pull request when sometimes it's pretty much the best allocation of resources, because the person is going to, like, you're just going to come, raise some concerns with the pull request and maybe nudge them toward a different approach that you haven't explored yourself. So you feel like it might be better, and then the person is going to spend time working toward this approach, and actually it was actually not a good idea to begin with.
When you're kind of evaluating the silliness of a knack, are you evaluating that based on sort of the ideological, like are people offering knacks or acts based on ideological purposes, or is it just strictly technical? Is that sort of the cultural norm?
If someone introduces, I don't know, an auto update in how we ship code, it's going to get a strict knack from on ideological ground, but it doesn't happen.
Does that get tricky? Like in terms of defining like appropriate ideological grounds as like what is ACK versus NAC?
I think the line between ideological and technical is not like as it's blurry, as Antoine pointed out, and it's not like there's some kind of like commandment like thou shalt not knack for ideological reasons. Like there's no like guideline for making decisions, and it's not a voting process. It's not like two people said ACK and two people said NAC. Like when you are deciding whether or not something has enough review for merge, you're weighing the merits of the arguments against each other, not the number of people on either side, and that's the judgment call that maintainers have to make.
And to be clear, acts can be much less justified, right? The act can be, I reviewed the code, it looks good, go.
And by the way, the vast majority of PRs don't have like an ideological component. Like most PRs that are merged are like CI is red, fix intermittently failing tests due to a race condition in it. Or like there is a bug in this thing, like change the integer so that it doesn't overflow, or like sanitizer found this like thing that's wrong, like don't compare signed and unsigned integer. You know, like a lot of it is not ideological. You know, it's not like the Church of Signed Integers says whatever.
Okay, so that's what did you want to add to that, Greg?
I thought that was a shot at Craig Wright right there.
No, I was going to say that's the perfect segue into my next sort of set of questions, which is how does this process change when we're talking about a soft fork activation?
I feel like Bitcoin Core is the last station for the soft fork train. So most people, like if you have a soft fork that does not have consensus among the industry and the community, people are just not going to engage with your pull request. If you just come and like, oh, here is code for my soft fork, you know, like, it's pretty obvious when something has consensus and when it doesn't.
I think for broader ecosystem things like consensus rules or even peer-to-peer protocol changes, even if it's as innocuous as like, let's add, you know, version 2 addresses to support Tor v3, like that seems, you know, fairly simple, but that's a broader ecosystem conversation to have, which is why I think for the last at least 12 something years, like those discussions are meant to happen on the bitcoindev mailing list. And I think since the mailing list has closed, we've maybe had some trouble figuring out what the new forum is going to be, well, whether it's delving or the Google group or whatever. But for as long as I can remember, those kinds of conversations aren't really appropriate to have on a forum that is moderated by the Bitcoin Core GitHub organization, because first of all, you don't want that much power, you don't want that power, and also this is so much bigger than just Bitcoin Core software. So I'm interpreting the question as like, what if, you know, what about like conversations that are much bigger? And yeah, they're not supposed to happen in Bitcoin Core.
I'm curious, so there are a couple of people in this room that I know that are working on soft fork proposals. I'm curious, like, you know, there's broad sort of understanding, I mean, at least to my understanding, that like there's no clear way to actually work towards, you know, making these kinds of proposals and getting these activations to happen. I know, Peter, you probably have the most experience with this of anyone on stage. And I'm curious if you have any kind of like learnings or thoughts based on your experience working with this process. Like, how would you recommend somebody who wants to propose a major soft fork activation even begin to manage that?
Starts like the activation is probably the very last stage in this question, but yeah, I don't know to answer there. Like I've personally been involved in a number of soft fork proposals in the past, and I want to make it clear, I think of the work on making the research and development that goes into this as like contributing to the Bitcoin protocol, and I see that as a different role than Bitcoin Core development. I've personally been involved in both, but there are certainly people in the ecosystem who just do protocol development and don't do specific implementation in any software project. And similarly, there are many contributors to Bitcoin Core who just work on getting the CI green and getting the unsigned integers to pass, and who have seemingly no interest in discussions about protocol changes. But so as far as protocol changes go, it's been pretty surprising to me how the process has really been different every time, or rather there is no, like, both the social aspect and the technical aspect have been like the ecosystem has so much, every time there was like a couple years in between, and the ecosystem changed completely, and the concerns that got brought up are different, and so
There's no roadmap.
There's no roadmap, and I think this is kind of inherent to the fact that we don't want, you know, an authoritarian leader to make the decision for, well, this is the direction the protocol is going to go in, but then what is the process? I don't know. Getting many people on board early helps. To avoid bike shedding, you don't want to involve everyone immediately. You start with a smaller group and start developing an idea, and then grow the number of people you get involved. This has worked in the past, but just as a matter of personal policy, I don't want to be involved in any future soft for core consensus changes in Bitcoin. So I think it's time for other people to do that.
We've seen with some recent sort of soft fork proposals, I think more involvement of kind of the broader Twitter sphere, if you will, like some public marketing of these things. I'm wondering kind of your guys' thoughts about that. Like as core developers, do you have like opinions about that? Does that hurt, harm? Like what is do you have points of view about that?
So not as a core developer, because that's, again, it's more like protocol stuff. I do think that there's stages, kind of loose stages of who you're trying to convince. And I think I'm not against hat wearing, but sometimes you can put the hat wearing before you convince like the next broader group you're supposed to convince, right? There's a group of people that are excited about something. Now you need to convince the next slightly larger circle, whether that's like, you know, not the people who are first movers in this protocol direction, maybe the second movers, then maybe the hobbyists, maybe reach out to people who have other thoughts about soft forks and try to really make sure that you validate kind of, first of all, your own excitement, sanity check that, as well as get other people excited. Because the important thing is you need to get people excited about it, otherwise it will die.
Any other thoughts about that from the group?
I don't know, I guess it brings potentially funding for more research as well, which is always good to have, but it also can bring funding for harassment campaigns, which is bad, so can be good, can be bad.
Pros and cons. Antoine, I have a question for you, actually. I know you're working on security disclosures. This is something we chatted about last night, and sort of you kind of mentioned that there's been some historical challenges with Bitcoin core developers sort of effectively communicating upgrades to sort of the broader developer community. I'm wondering if you could touch a little bit on some of the communications challenges that you think core devs have with, again, the broader Bitcoin community, and you know how you see those being addressed.
Sure. I just want to absolutely differentiate the work I do on consensus with the recent drama. It's like my consensus proposal is very, very different. It's a whole different level than changing small policy change. So with regard to communication, it does not mean, though, that other changes do not need to be communicated properly. I think it piggybacks also to Gloria's earlier points about the lack of formal organization around what Bitcoin Core wants to prioritize or wants to actually get done, because it means that it also prevents effective communication, because if we don't know what we want to do, there is no we, there is no we. So if you don't have a we, you can't have a proper communication. If you don't have a proper communication, it gives an edge to anyone that is interested in dunking on you.
How do you solve for this? Is there no solve?
In the past, I advocated for more formal organization of Bitcoin Core because I believe it will help us to achieve more, to have... This is a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have total formal organization, hierarchical organization, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have complete anarchy. Anything can just get in the software as long as it's got enough review from reputable people. I think neither end of the spectrum are good, and I think we're too far on the anarchy side of the spectrum at the moment. It prevents us from effectively communicating and prioritizing. But I think it's more something to discuss within the group of contributors at the moment.
I think a lot of times we conflate decentralization with disorganization, in that I think people are really concerned about appearing to look like they're trying to control things, which I think is a very valid, like, kind of directionally I agree with, but there are clearly things that require coordination and a group doing things as a unit, like security disclosures and making sure that those things are handled properly, that they're kept secret until appropriate, that they're patched and then communicated to the users to upgrade, and then you later tell them why you told them to upgrade. And of course, giving credit to the people who disclosed it and patched it. These are all, they're very basic security practices, really, from a software point of view. But that kind of requires there to be some central planning, right? And over quite a long period of time, sometimes. Similarly, with communication, I think there are so many core devs, including myself, who just don't feel comfortable ever trying to speak on behalf of the group, no matter how obvious the statement is. And so, and a lot of them, frankly, don't want to be on social media being harassed by the kinds of people that are usually on social media, and so don't do that work. But it's also, clearly, as we see very recently, when nobody does it, like maintenance, like security, like all of the other things that keep the lights running, if nobody does it, then you have this gaping hole and this problem that manifests itself in what we've been seeing recently.
And maybe actually, if you want me, I can go through how it came to happen, because it's a good example of the lack of organization. It's just,
You mean this week? What happened this week?
what happened with the security disclosure, how it came to be. It's an example of just emergent processes. Started contributing more actively to Bitcoin Core, and I don't even remember. We started discussing at some developer meetups about security disclosures and how we wanted to handle them, and then talking to more senior developers in the project. They were like, yeah, we don't have any specific standards right now. And then 6 months later, we had another core dev, another contributor was interested as well, Niklas Goga, who has found a number of vulnerabilities in Bitcoin Core, and we got together and we went to the old timers and say, well, what can we do? And they were like, well, we can potentially go through all the previous reports that we had that were already public and try to inform from this data our decision of how to have a standard moving forward. So we went back home from the meetup, then we organized a group chat, then we had video calls, where we went through all the reports and said, all right, what if we have this report right now? How do we treat it? How long do we want to withhold the information? How do we publish it? Where do we publish it? How do we categorize it? How do we archive it? And then we actually did it eventually for all the historical issues, and we went through the process of publishing them, and then now we are doing it for newer reports as well, from new vulnerabilities that were disclosed after we have established this process. But it was just a process of just, hey, what do we do? And we just started doing it as a subgroup of the whole group. It was not, we didn't get all together in a room and say, oh, we need a disclosure policy, and we are going to affect this working group to do the disclosure policy. It was just people trying to do something useful.
I'm curious, just sort of on the topic of communications / anarchy. I think we should get into a little bit of what happened this week. Gloria told me that it was appropriate to ask Antoine to just tell the story from his point of view. So, Antoine, you're still on, and then we'll... What happened, Antoine, from your point of view?
Well, Lisa wanted to sell a lot of Bitcoin plus tickets. Well, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but it's also, again, a very good example of emergent process, because I just went to Bitcoin, the MIT Bitcoin Expo, where I met this guy, founder of Citria, and who blew my mind, basically, because of the apparent lack of communication between application developers and protocol developers, because they had spent probably a year or more designing a protocol that worked around a bunch of restrictions we had at the protocol level. So started by telling me, oh yeah, well, we are, to optimize in our round transactions, we have very large transactions, a few hundred kilobytes. I was like, but that's not standard. I was like, oh yeah, well, we just use slipstream. I was like, what? And then he just kept on giving. Oh yeah, and we have this transaction, it has 1,000 dust output. What? Do you eventually spend them? No, there are 0 set outputs, and that's not standard. Oh yeah, that's through slipstream as well. Oh, and we have the second stage transaction that where we didn't have enough bytes in the up return, so we just use unspendable type-read outputs to store data. And then I was, wait, hold on. Can we try to fix those problems? And if we take them by order of importance, I think the second one is the more important, and then the first one about very large transactions for reasons that maybe Peter and Gloria can go into more than I can. And then the third one was the least important, the one about the up return, but also the easiest one to fix. It was obvious that we had a restriction in the Bitcoin Core standardness rules that was not binding anymore. It was not constraining anybody, but because they had time-sensitive transactions, and for this kind of transaction, they couldn't use slipstream. They had to go through the public censorship-resistant relay network. They wanted to be standard compliant, and for them, it didn't cost them anymore to just use unspendable type-read outputs that is harmful to the rest of all the Bitcoin users. So they just went for it, and so I just went back in the train back to New York, or shortly after, I just emailed the mailing list saying, well, we should drop this standardness restriction because we introduced these limits in the protocol and they distorted incentives, and they're incentivizing people to do more harmful behavior. So we should stop that. We had some discussion on the mailing list. Then eventually I emailed Peter Todd to reopen his pull request that he had a year or two ago about removing the up return standardness limit, because it was like,
Did you pay him?
I did not, but I still got refunded yesterday.
So he paid you.
Yes, I emailed him kind of like, you were right kind of moment, because he advised to do it 2 years ago, because people are going to work around those limitations that are not binding anymore and are going to do more harmful stuff. Well, you were right, they did it. So now, not because of CTRA itself, but because it was proven right and it's going to incentivize new protocols to just do more harmful stuff, it's like the best time to do it was 2 years ago. The next best time is now. So that was my point, and then yeah, what ensued.
I think it's worth commenting a bit on how the world has changed since that limit was introduced, because I used to be strongly in favor of this limit. We're talking 10 plus years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but at the time, Bitcoin blocks were not consistently full. People were building solutions like putting wallet backups on the chain. It was a small ecosystem where there were serious concerns about if suddenly the floodgates go open and blocks will be an order of magnitude bigger than they are, this will massively increase the costs for running a node. There was no pruning yet, the software was much less efficient. And so I think in that context, it made perfect sense to nudge people away from things that could harm the, growing ecosystem at a time. And, since then, the network just grew organically, massively, and blocks have been consistently full for the past 8 years-ish, not all the time, but substantial portions of the time. During the time, blocks have been consistently full. So to me, it feels like that rule that was there was there to prevent blocks from increasing resource costs to everyone. But that is the case anyway, whether those transactions go in or not. And so that plus the harmful behavior of incentivizing private rails towards miners that make it harder for nodes to reason about transactions, see my talk yesterday, impacted compact block relay and so forth. This has outlived his usefulness, and it's time to get rid of it.
I think it's worth noting that when Peter Todd opened his PR in 2023, the thoughts that we have today about not wanting to incentivize people to use accelerator, slipstream type services, that was already definitely in the minds of a lot of contributors. But like that PR, like a lot of policy PRs around that time, was essentially brigaded to death. Like basically the same thing happened 2 weeks ago as 2 years ago, where lots and lots and lots of people from Twitter like came to the PR and like posted huge walls of text, and then people who voiced certain opinions were screenshotted and put on Twitter and dragged to the whipping post and called destroyers of Bitcoin and things like that. And I think I remember that PR or some other policy PR around that time was locked as well. And so, even the people who wanted to say something in support of this PR very much did not feel comfortable doing so. And so I think it's really bad when, like, we just went over the whole like idea that Bitcoin Core PRs are supposed to be reviewed in this like meritocratic process where the arguments are evaluated like across each other, and also the fact that like this is entirely voluntary and there are 300 other PRs that nobody is obligated to weigh in on a PR where just because they have an opinion or are the expert in that code area. And so I think this time we didn't want that to be the case, because I think the process broke down 2 years ago. Like Peter Todd was right 2 years ago, but we weren't able to conduct the meritocratic decision-making process in public that we usually want to do. I say we as if there is a we, but like it didn't play out the way that a typical PR would play out because Twitter came.
Because
basically,
spam.
Yeah, like basically, and so I think, and that wasn't the only PR at the time. There were PRs that were pointing out that the filters were not a very good prescriptive like template for what is good/bad network resources rise, right? Like somebody had a PR being like, why is bare multisig standard? Because it was like haphazardly created in the decentralized process of Bitcoin Core contributions, right? And I think it was quite sad to see that the decision-making process was breaking down 2 years ago, and we wanted to not give in to that again. And so we tried something moderation-wise. I don't think we did a perfect job. I think there were mistakes that were made. But the goal was to try to still preserve the like civil technical discourse that you would hope to be able to have on a Bitcoin Core PR.
And to underline the point, it's how I think most contributors see it is that we fail to prioritize the vast silent majority of Bitcoin users because of a loud minority. And you might disagree with the opinion of most contributors on the project, but I think that's how they see it, like me included. We're trying to find a process such as we can weigh the interest of all people. Like Bitcoin Twitter is a tiny minority of Bitcoin users, and a tiny minority of Bitcoin Twitter is loudly against the change. And I think me included, well, I might have been dismissive of some of the concerns that was raised, and we can do better on the communication front. But in terms of actions, how we see it is really we should prioritize the interest of all Bitcoin users and not only a tiny minority.
So, I mean, would you say broadly there were specific things that happened last week that you would defend, but maybe there are other things that you would do differently? Like if you were going to redo last week, what would you do differently? And what would you say, no, these are the reasons why we made these decisions and we stand by them?
It's hard. Moderation is really hard. And thank you to the people who do moderation on Bitcoin Core. These are software engineers who love to write code and are instead reading flame wars and making really hard decisions as people who are usually free speech absolutists. I wrote up a big tweet about why moderation is necessary in online forums, and especially necessary in the online forum that is our GitHub repository where code review happens. There's active moderation every day because you guys don't see it, but there's lots of spam that is open to the repository. And I think nobody ever has problems with the kinds of deletion, or not deletions, but like closing that happens when people are like, you guys are terrorists, or like, change the supply cap to 50 million because 50 is a better number. You know, like there's lots and lots of daily spam. I would stand by the fact that people were pushed to outside forums, like the Google group or delving/mailing list, because a lot of the conversations were not really Bitcoin Core specific. Like I said, should be wider ecosystem. Bitcoin Core does not want to be able to moderate the broader ecosystem conversations, and is not the only stakeholder or piece of software that's relevant in those conversations. There was, I think we made a mistake where like the people who were moderating weren't totally on the same page about what locking should mean. And there was kind of like a philosophical difference. One of the moderators felt that it should still be the case that contributors can still review, like regular contributors. So I think probably a lot of people saw the unlock and then ACK and then relock that happened within 1 minute. We had a discussion, that was a mistake. We fucked up, all right? I admit that. And I don't know, you can see this as like a formal apology or whatever. And we tried to fix it by deleting the comment, because the purpose of the lock was to make sure that nobody can comment. As just like a cool down. Like this is a common like moderation thing. There's just like hundreds of comments coming in. The moderators is like, don't know what to do. There's just too much volume. It's too heated. It's like trending on Twitter or whatever. We should just like lock it. Nobody can comment, not the frequent contributors, not the maintainers, nobody. And just like everybody just like fucking chill for 24 hours.
Cool off period.
Yeah, and then hopefully like also push the discussion to the more appropriate forums. So yeah, that's like what I would say. One thing I'd defend, and one thing I'd say we fucked up.
I would say one thing should have been clearly kind of conveyed that this is not a rush. This change, I see a lot of people thinking that was already merged immediately, or that Peter Todd has some magical power over the maintainers, or,
Peter Todd banned people, right?
pull requests take months and months and months. If you've been involved in the process, you know that. I have one open right now as a competitor to Peter Todd's, and that's like, it might get closed, and that's fine with me. It's just, I would urge patience, because we're not in a rush here.
Yeah, we're not in a rush, and since I was the instigator and you asked what we could do differently, well, first of all, it's easy to see in hindsight, but I genuinely did not expect this to be that contentious. So first of all, we need to recognize what issue is going to be contentious. And if it's going to be contentious among large parts of the Bitcoiners, which is Bitcoin enthusiast community, let's say, I think we should go to great length to explain why we do what we are going to do, but then there is a we in this sentence. So it needs, instead of just me sending an email to the list and 10 days later send an email to Peter to open the pull request, maybe I should bring it up during a meeting. Maybe we can put up a blog post on the BitcoinConf website explaining how we see these kind of things, discuss it on Twitter, and then eventually open the pull request so that we diffuse the drama, especially from the perception, as Greg mentioned, that it was rushed. I think a lot of people got the perception that it was a done deal, that it arrived on Twitter as if, oh, the core dev just did this. Well, first of all, it was completely blown out of proportion compared to the actual change that it is. But it was also, yeah, they're rushing this down your throats, and we can diffuse this perception by communicating in advance, which requires coordination among the project and vision of what is going to be contentious on it.
Okay, this is my final question on this particular topic. So, I mean, would you guys sort of give, I believe one of you told me last night that there's sort of like a formal moderation policy written in the GitHub. Guideline, not policy. It's loose. I don't know if you could sort of give like a little bit of a TLDR, but I mean, how would you guys define appropriate discourse in the repo versus not? I mean, like, is it sort of subjective in terms of how you define spam or block people from the repo, or how do you make sort of distinctions? What are you hoping to see from people in terms of what constitutes productive dialogue?
So I'm not a moderator, but I can speak to how the GitHub UI really sucks, and how, as a contributor, when you get hundreds of comments, it makes it impossible to actually iterate on a PR. And so I think, to me, part of moderation is not to kill people's voices, but to minimize the harm it does on that process as well. I don't know how exactly to do that, but that's one thing I have in mind, because I've had multiple PRs where I looked at Peter Todd's PR recently. I'm like, I can't even tell what's going on. I don't know, has the code changed? Who said what? I have no clue. And this is like a meta comment, I guess. Just like whatever the moderators do, they're kind of confined to working within whatever GitHub gives them as far as like controls and interface.
Imagine being a maintainer and having to go through all the comments.
Yeah, and I'm not a maintainer, which I'm very glad for.
I agree.
I think we should see the Bitcoin Core GitHub page as our workspace. It is by design and deliberately transparent to the extent we can, but it is our workplace, and if it's being invaded to an extent that people can't do their work, there is something wrong. And yes, it is open to the public. Like, people can open issues and voice their views, but it is a place for technical discussion, not for accusing people of bad faith or making legal threats or once it gets to that point, it's a place for technical discussion and or cool down or go elsewhere.
Which, maybe for context as well, we had 2 weeks before this drama happened of someone continuously harassing us, have legal threats on the repo. Years, but he was pretty active in the past 2 weeks on the BIPs repo, right? We had all these moderation discussions, and
he was the reason for moderation.
Yeah, he was the reason that we introduced moderation in the first place.
No, moderation has existed for a very, very long time.
Okay, for more
standards.
Yeah, kind of the
Objective
more gray
standards.
area stuff. Yeah.
All right, Walton, can you give me a time check right now?
We have till 5, so 10 more minutes.
Oh man, yikes. Okay, that went faster than I thought it was. I do want to make sure that people have opportunity to ask questions, so I might just dive into Q&A. I wanted to chat about projects, but hopefully you guys saw their presentations. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, great.
Sorry.
So I don't know if this is off topic, but so it seems like this controversy started with unspendable outputs, right? So this has been a problem since before SegWit and kind of influenced the way SegWit was developed. So is this a problem worth fixing? And if so, if you're, and a second part to this question is, if you're removing the limits on op return, is there still a point to having the SegWit discount?
It seems orthogonal. If you really,
I mean, I can speak to why the SegWit discount exists is because data and inputs is less costly to the network. It doesn't go in the UTXO set. It's ephemeral. So that was a justification for, at the time, the ecosystem very much desired higher capacity, and the discount was a way of giving that in a way that wasn't as bad as just a straight up capacity increase.
Or extension block.
Yes. And does it allow more data storage? Well, yes, obviously.
Yeah, but if you're removing the limits on op return, couldn't that data just go in op returns instead? Because before there was still restrictions on op return, right? So people were making unspendable outputs to get around, like people will always want to put data in a transaction. They're going to figure out how to do it. So yeah, so like, is it worth fixing unspendable outputs? And if we are going to allow an arbitrary amount of data to be put in the output of a transaction using op returns, let's say it's the proper way to do it because we can prune that from the UTXO set, then do we still need a SegWit
the data
discount?
that goes in the witness is equally pruned.
Yeah, but the SegWit, that data gets a discount. So, but I guess I thought the point of that discount was to disincentivize people from putting it in the outputs. But if now you can put in an unlimited amount of data in the outputs, as long as it's an op return, then what's the point of having a discount for the witness?
Can a random audience member jump in?
yes, please.
Give it a shot.
Wait, but it's used for a lot more than data.
Also, sorry. Maybe before he goes, the big difference here is that we were discussing a limit by standardness, like large op returns are valid today by consensus. It was possible to use, and they have been used on the network. There's blocks with large op returns, and the witness discount is by consensus. Just to
And we can't give a discount to outputs without a hard fork to pair that together, I guess.
Well, I think at like a higher level, like the core selling point of the witness, from what I remember back in those discussions, was incentives. Like an input is just way bigger than an output. And when you're paying for fees based on the byte space you're using, there's always going to be an economic incentive to fragment an existing high value UTXO you have rather than condense smaller value ones. So it doesn't completely make it one-to-one, but it aligns those costs a lot closer than they were.
Maybe another point to make, like after SegWit, it became cheaper to, bytes were cheaper in the witness. I'd expect very few op returns at that point because the same argument would apply for a discount there, but it just can't be done through the same technical means. It just turns out to be the case that the crossover point for where it becomes cheaper to store something in the witness versus to storing it in an output is just slightly bigger, like 140 bytes-ish. So I think the whole op return question is just entirely irrelevant to someone who wants to store large amounts of data. And like, does that answer your question a bit?
Well, then what about unspendable outputs? Like, is that worth fixing?
What problem?
What do you mean?
Unprovably unspendable, or which kind?
Oh yeah, are you talking about?
Like UTXO bloat?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can create outputs that are unspendable, but you don't know that they're unspendable,
Yeah.
so you can't prune them. Like
Yeah.
that's been an
Yeah.
exploit for the longest
It's
time.
not an exploit. It's a resource usage, and we have constraints on the resources, and the relevant constraints for this is the block size. So the block size fundamentally limits the growth of the UTXO set, but that's all you can do.
And similarly, you can create a spendable output and never spend it.
I have a I have a question. I like what Antoine said earlier about maybe some lessons learned and application devs. I wouldn't. It's like protocol to protocol, but I actually consider that like an application on top of Bitcoin, even though it's still protocol. Maybe conferences being also cool places for y'all to meet, but especially if you don't meet otherwise. But one thing I feel like you didn't address was any sort of like lessons learned or anything that we can take away is if you mentioned NACs have a strong presence, and if you have a stonewall knacker that isn't willing to budge, I don't really feel like y'all talked about what historical precedents of what happens then, or how do y'all dispute resolution within core typically. I'd be curious to hear what's happened in the past and what happens when you have someone just dead set on not wanting to agree on a certain thing, not willing to budge. With the context that this person has historically been a contributor or prominent or something like this.
Well, again, it's not really about like the number of people acting or knocking. Like if this person continues knocking and their argument doesn't really make sense or their concerns have already been addressed, and like I think it's fine to not have to ask them to retract their knock. Like the process, it's not a voting process. Yes, reputation somewhat matters, but at the end of the day, if you're just knocking for no reason, then the knock doesn't matter. Even if you bring lots of Twitter people on.
Your turn, and then we'll go here. I'm sorry. He's been waiting. I apologize. And then we'll go there.
I really like what Antoine said about the almost like a baton pass from the protocol dev to the application dev, like that understanding. I think there's not enough communication, like you guys said. Maybe you guys ship something amazing, for example, Miniscript, and people don't know exists, so they're demanding soft forks with maybe some capabilities that they could do in the meantime without their proposal needing to be soft forked in. I remember Steve Lee, Mike Schmidt, and John Newberry used to do Taproot workshops, things like that. Have you guys thought of any like sort of developer relations to help the communication between the protocol devs and the app devs?
I love this question.
Well, there's like it's like Mike and like Dave Harding are still doing OpTech, and they are still like creating amazing content every single week. And I've always thought of like, they're doing DevRel. There's no like Bitcoin Core should hire a DevRel person because there is no Bitcoin Core hiring process. But yeah, I think OpTech deserves a lot more publicity than it gets, really. Go and follow and retweet what OpTech does. But yeah, I think there's definitely more room for more communications. But I think all of us do some communication in some way, shape, or form. That's why we come to conferences, for example, to talk about our work. And
learn about others.
Yeah.
Work.
Yeah, I think everyone, it's different from a normal company, right? Where like you are a DevRel or you are a software engineer and you go to conferences and you don't, right? I think everybody wears different hats at different times. Based on whatever thing it is that they care about. And there are holes in some places, but yeah, I think we also feel frustrated when we go to a conference and like nobody's there to listen to the talk, or like OpTech makes like Merch and I did a Waiting for Confirmation series on OpTech. It was 10 blog posts over 10 weeks where we talked about Mempool, why it exists, policy, why it exists, history, and we like named all of the policies essentially and giving their rationale. And we were like, we worked really hard on that stuff and pretty much nobody read it. And then it becomes relevant year after year as things are very controversial in the Mempool policy realm. But yeah, so like, communication's a two-way street. You meet in the middle, and I think we can do more in some ways, and it would be nice if people read things.
Also, that's Greg's job.
Always.
You've been working on second layer protocols and trying to see what the needs on the layer one side, like you work with Mempool to adapt to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of
Try.
learning from other people's work, you mentioned there were three sort of problems with the Citrea protocol, and OpReturn was sort of the least important. What were the other two, and what are the mitigations for that?
So I can't speak for the exact numbers, but there's a trade-off in like how much capital is being locked up in the system. We have 1 minute left. 1,000 dust outputs. Maybe you can do a lot less. You already had a talk, didn't you? Yeah. There's like lots of dust, a big transaction to disprove like a proof. It's like a size like 4 megabytes. And those are the two other ones pretty much. And those should be done very rarely at least, right? So the regular happy path transaction flow is standard.
So is there no mitigation?
They're going to clean up their dust.
The very big transactions, the difficulty with those is that as soon as transactions become bigger and bigger, the bin packing problem of maximizing fees by miners becomes harder. As long as transactions are small relative to the size of a block, this is a negligible problem. And we like to maintain the ability for the entire network to be on equal footing and not, if you can invest in better algorithms and better reasoning as a miner than you can do at a public network, we run in the same kind of problems that everything hard in the mempool is.
Greg presented on that at Strategy too.
Excuse me?
You presented on this at the event 2 weeks ago at Strategy.
About which topic?
About the BitVM bridges forcing too much capital to be locked in.
Oh, so no, that's a separate topic. But yeah, that's more like unilateral closed costs kind of talk, which is a little different. Yeah, but there's like just engineering constraints on these connector outputs they're making, and like they can hide some of it and not hide some of it, but then it costs them more capital. And it's like they're making these trade-offs because the kind of the API of the mempool doesn't match what they want, and so that's like inherent tensions in resource usage, anti-denial of service, block building, and what they want to do, and that's like a continuing challenge.
And which maybe goes back to the drama this week is in this specific instance, they are trying to play nice and they are going to do additional work to try and make that transaction stand out because we asked them kindly. But not everyone is going to do that. And if we are faced with people that just don't care about decentralization and don't care about other users of the network, the only option we have is to change the consensus rules. So the solution is to ask nice. Or transaction size limits of fork.
All right. I think that's all we got.